Hey guys, Jordan Wallace down here at Pizzeria Locale, our 6th and Broadway location. I'm the culinary director for Pizzeria Locale, and today we're going to show you how to make our dough from scratch. So our style of pizza is neighborhood Neapolitan, and what that really boils down to is 4-ingredient dough, just salt, water, flour, and yeast. We do a slow overnight fermentation. We stretch by hand, and we cook our pizzas in a super hot oven. And all those things play a factor in the outcome and the texture of the pizza. So the class is gonna break down into a couple parts. First, I'm gonna show you how to make the dough. The dough does 24 hours, so we're gonna make it today, and then I have some that I made yesterday that I'll demonstrate stretching and topping and talk about baking with. Probably the first thing I wanna do is just tell you a little bit about our style of pizza. We do neighborhood Neapolitan, which is basically a riff on Neapolitan pizza. Neapolitan pizza is traditionally cooked at a super high temperature, about 1.5 minute, 2-minute cook time. And it uses really specific ingredients. It's stretched by hand. So we do a lot of that. We cook ours a little bit longer, and we use a lower moisture mozzarella instead of a super wet, fresh mozzarella, just so we get a slightly crispier style of pizza. So here's our ingredients. And so we make the dough with just 4 ingredients. It's really simple. We have sea salt, we have dry active yeast, we have 00 flour, and we have just cold tap water. So each ingredient plays an important role. So the flour is 00, and that refers to how finely ground the flour is. So 00 is super finely ground flour, and that's important for the gluten development. So when you mix the water and the flour and you start to knead it and mix it together, there's a couple proteins inside of the flour called glutenin and gliadin. And when those proteins combine, they create strands. Those strands are gluten. So flour doesn't actually have gluten in it. It's a product of the mixing process and the proteins creating strands. So that's super important, obviously, for pizza. Pizza dough is very elastic and it has a spring to it. And it also creates kind of like a net that holds the air in the dough. So the salt is used for seasoning mainly. And then the yeast is actually a living organism, and it feeds on the naturally occurring sugars inside the flour. And the byproduct is gas and alcohol. And so you have this gluten net that you've created, and then the yeast is feeding on the sugars and releasing gas, and the net's keeping that gas in. And so that's where you get that rise on the dough, and that structure and the big bubbles that burst and char up in the oven. So all super important. You can make this recipe with any kind of flour, you're just gonna get a different result. So AP flour is less finely ground. You're not gonna get the same elasticity. Same with bread flour. So likely with those types of flours, you'd wanna work it a little more. You can also use kosher salt. You can use different kinds of yeast, and usually there's conversion tables online. But for this specific recipe, that's what we use. If you're making pizza right now along with this, this is a 24-hour recipe. So you're gonna mix it today, and you can use it tomorrow or the next day or the next day. But typically we do a slower fermentation. It really helps with the flavors and also the texture of the dough. So we're making it today to use tomorrow. So the class is gonna be broken down a little bit. We'll make the dough, but then I have some dough that I made yesterday that we'll show the second part of the class with. And I think that's it, so we'll get started. So the first thing we have is 1.5 cups of water. And we're just gonna put our yeast in there, and it's a teaspoon of dry active yeast. So this is step 1. And so I'm just waiting like a minute so the yeast will start to dissolve and we get it really evenly distributed in the water. And I'm using metal bowls. You can use plastic bowls, you can use wooden bowls, whatever you have is fine. All right, so your water will get kind of cloudy, kind of muddy looking, and that's good. So right now you have in the bowl just the water and the yeast, and then we're gonna add the 3.5 cups of 00 flour. 00 flour is kind of hard to find. Usually you'd have to find it in like an Italian specialty deli or something, but you can also buy it on our website, pizzerialocale.com. We sell it. It's a great place to get it. So I got the flour, the yeast, and the water in there. Now I'm just gonna start combining those ingredients. And once it starts to look a little clumpy, probably right about there, we're gonna sprinkle in the salt, and it's 2 1/4 teaspoons of salt. Also, if you need to reference the measurements of all the ingredients, there's recipes on pizzerialocale.com as well. All right, salt, flour, water, yeast, it's all in there. And now I'm just continuing to mix it until it forms like a clump. Until it all sticks together, essentially. So I'm kind of turning it and then smashing it. And you can see it's already starting to form pretty well. And once you get it to a place where you can grab it with your hand, like so, then you're ready to work on the table. This recipe is pretty sticky, and it should be that way. It's got high moisture content, and that's really good for the crust, the texture. So I can pick it, it's all formed together. I'm basically just gonna fold it over on itself and press down, and then turn and do the same thing. And so this is a gentle way of working the dough, but it's serving the same process of creating gluten structure. And so you can see right now it's super clumpy. It doesn't look very smooth, but as we go through the process, it'll get smoother and smoother. Okay, so I probably did that 6 or 7 times, and I'm just kind of tucking it in on itself. So it's a nice dough ball, but it's really clumpy. So now we're gonna put it in a bowl, and you're gonna cover it with plastic, and you're gonna set it aside for 15 minutes. So we're gonna do that process 3 times. Fold it, turn it, fold it, turn it, put it in the bowl, set it aside for 15 minutes, and then do it again. You do that process 3 times, and on the last time, you're gonna put it in the fridge, wrap it with plastic, and then 24 hours goes by and you move on to the next step. So you can see the difference. So this is the one I made yesterday that's had time to do its thing. And so doubled in size. You can see there's tons of air and fluffiness going on in there versus what I just made, totally different. So fast forward to tomorrow, what you're gonna do is when you're about 3 hours away from wanting to eat pizza, you're gonna take your dough out of the fridge, you're gonna divide it into 4 dough balls. And this recipe makes 4 10-inch pizzas. If you wanna make a couple bigger ones, that's fine too. But what you're gonna do is so we did the overnight fermentation, now we're gonna do the room temperature proof. Okay, so I'm just dividing that big dough ball into 4. And then the same process, it's just the kind of fold and press, turn, fold and press, and then tuck it in so you get a nice looking ball. Same deal. So once these hit this form, that one's a little small, but no big deal. Once these hit this form, you're gonna just gently cover them with either like a damp towel or plastic wrap, and you can leave them right on the counter or on a baking sheet. And it takes about 3 hours for these to double again. And once they double again, then you're ready to bake. These are dough balls that I made just like that about 3 or 4 hours ago. And so for comparison, you can see it's definitely plumped up. It looks really good. When it looks like this, you're ready to go. Before you start stretching, you're gonna wanna have your oven on, and you're gonna wanna have it as hot as it can go on bake. So if you have a convection oven, put convection on. Put your your rack on the top shelf and turn it to like 500 convection bake, or as high as it goes. So the hotter the better. And you wanna have the oven preheated, ready to rock, and then you can start stretching and building the pizza. If you're using a pizza stone, preheat the oven and put the stone in there. You want the stone to be super hot as well. And there's like a different technique for the stone, but I'll talk about both of those. This or that, once it is wrapped and in your fridge, it's good for a few days. So you don't have to use it like immediately. It probably lasts 3 days in there. All right, so next up, I'm gonna show you how to stretch the proofed ready to go dough. before that, I'm just gonna get my baking sheet because I'm basically gonna press it, stretch it, and then put it right down to the sheet, and then build it, and then put it right in the oven. So a little bit of oil, olive oil, grapeseed, canola, whatever you have. Just helps the bottom get a little color, and it helps it come off the pan when it's done baking. All right, so for the stretching part, you need a little bit of that same 00 flour, or whatever flour you're using. Put it right on the table. And so obviously at home, you're not gonna have probably won't have a box like this, but it serves the same purpose if you just wrap that with plastic. That's basically what this is doing. You might not have a plastic dough mate scraper, but if you have a metal spatula or a plastic spatula, that'll work fine. So flour your dough. You want to scrape it up off of wherever it is and flop it into the flour pile. I'll show you this a couple times just because it is the hardest part. Okay, so it's important that wherever you're proofing the dough, that when you take it from that place to the flour, you keep it in a really nice shape. So get both sides nice and floured. It's a pretty nice looking circle already. Okay, so the press is with these 6-finger pads. So it's just the top pad. It's just those 3 fingers. And it's not a whole hand press, and it's not a fingertip press. It's like a bend at the knuckle and just hit the full 3 pads. You're gonna start inside the edge, right? So the edge is your crust. So you don't wanna smash the crust, you wanna smash just inside. Like so, and then smash the middle. Press the middle. Flip it over and do it again. And I'm putting a good amount of pressure on there. And so now it's already big enough that my whole hand can fit in there. And then you're ready to stretch. Whatever shape it is right now, the stretching part's gonna do 2 things. It's gonna dust all the flour off of there. Flour is the enemy. Once you're done pressing it, you never wanna put it back in the flour. And 2, it's just gonna expand whatever shape you already have. So this is what you're stuck with at this point. So I want all that flour off of there. So I be pretty gentle at first and just kind of pat it. I'm being mindful not to like poke my fingers through or damage the crust. Okay? And then I'm just passing it back and forth between my hands. Don't overcomplicate it. It's literally just passing it between your hands. Super simple. As it gets bigger, you got to kind of throw it up your arm, just so it doesn't like flop over. Okay? And then at the very end, you probably put it to your knuckles and just kind of slowly walk it and stretch it on your knuckles until it's about 10, 11 inches. And then, like I said, you're gonna have your greased baking sheet and you're just gonna flop it right on there. So at this point, your oven's hot. You're ready to top that and then bake it. One other thing I should mention is with this recipe, because you're using measuring cups and measuring spoons, there can be a little variation from batch to batch. You might get a drier one, you might get a little bit wetter one. Wetter is always better, because you can always add more flour, but the drier batches, everything takes a little longer. It takes longer to proof, it takes longer to soften up so that you can use it. So it will take a little bit of practice. We use a super hot oven, so our oven's probably closer to 750. And the reason we use a super hot oven is it really attacks the air that's in there and it causes big bubbles, big black charring. You're not gonna get something totally like that at home. It's gonna be a little bit more golden brown. That's why you wanna get your oven as hot as possible. The bake time is approximately 10 minutes, depending on how crispy you like it. And today I'm gonna show you how to make a margherita pizza. So a margherita pizza is just 3 or 4 ingredients. So it's a pizza that was named after Queen Margherita, and it resembles the Italian flag. So you have red for the sauce, green for the basil, and the white cheese. So that's the Italian flag. And then usually you put like a little drizzle of olive oil on top. It's really simple, it's delicious. You always use fresh basil because it's so aromatic. Just put a little dollop right in the middle, squash it with your spoon, and then in a circular motion push it towards the crust. So, basil, we always do basil underneath because it gets burnt if it's on top of the cheese. All right, and then a little bit of that lower moisture mozzarella. Just a light drizzle of olive oil. All right, so that's the margarita pizza. And I'm gonna stick this straight in the oven and it'll bake for about 10 minutes and you're ready to go. And that's it. Good luck.